You walk into the room and the child bursts with joy. Not crying, but the complete opposite. The child stretches both arms wide, the entire body leaning forward, making a sound that is a mix between a squeal of delight and an intense demand. Then 10 minutes later, the other parent walks into the room and receives only a polite glance, maybe a tiny little smile, nowhere near what had just happened before. And if you are the parent who only receives that polite glance, you know that very specific feeling that comes with it all too well. It is an emotion somewhere between amusement and a quiet little sting that you never say out loud. Most people call this just a temporary developmental phase. Pediatricians call this phenomenon completely normal. Technically, both of those things are true. But researchers who have spent their entire careers studying early attachment behavior in infants will tell you a truth that no ordinary explanation fully captures. What looks like favoritism or an emotional choice is actually one of the most complex and sophisticated evaluation systems ever created by evolution, and the child operating that system has absolutely no idea that they are doing it. Let's begin with the theory that everyone automatically assumes is true, which is that the child will prefer whoever feeds them, whoever is around them more, whoever does most of the caregiving. It is an incredibly simple input-output logic, assuming that the more exposure there is, the stronger the bond becomes. It sounds completely solid and reasonable, and for a very long time, that was the dominant assumption in developmental psychology. Then researchers actually put it to the test. A study in 2013 from the University of Haifa followed 112 families throughout the first 18 months of the child's life. They tracked caregiving hours, feeding patterns, nighttime awakenings, and monitored everything. Then they measured attachment preference at 6, 9, and 12 months of age using a standardized procedure called the strange situation procedure. What they found almost completely destroyed that contact time theory. The number of primary caregiving hours did not reliably predict which parent the child would prefer. In a significant percentage of families, children actually showed stronger attachment responses to the parent who spent less time with them. The researchers initially expected to confirm conventional wisdom, but instead, they got a result that made no intuitive sense at all. So, if it is not time, what is the core factor here? The answer comes from a completely different direction. In 2019, a research team at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences published a study examining what they called interactional contingency. This term sounds technical, but the concept is deceptively simple. Contingency here means responsiveness. It is not how often you are there, but how consistent you are in noticing what the child is signaling and responding to it right in that moment. A parent who is present 12 hours a day, but is often distracted, often stressed, often glued to a phone or lost in their own thoughts, creates a completely different neural experience for the child than a parent who is present only 4 hours, but is fully attentive and attuned throughout those 4 hours. The child's brain, as the researchers discovered, is not counting hours. It is measuring something far more precise than that. It is measuring how often this person truly sees me. And this is where the science becomes truly strange and fascinating. Infants as young as 8 weeks old already show the ability to distinguish between responses that depend on their own behavior and responses that are completely unrelated. Researchers tested this using a model called the mobile contingency task. Infants were connected to a hanging crib mobile through a ribbon tied to their leg. When the infants kicked, the mobile moved. Most infants discovered this mechanism within just a few minutes and began kicking with increasing interest and purpose. Then the researchers made the mobile move completely randomly, disconnected from the child's actions. The infants immediately recognized the change. Not in a way they could put into words, but in a way the data recorded very clearly. Heart rate changed, engagement decreased, an expression that in older subjects you would call disappointment and eventually withdrawal. The researchers concluded that the infant brain is already equipped with a system for detecting contingency, detecting cause and effect, detecting that they did something and that it was noticed, and every interaction with a caregiver runs through that same sophisticated detection system. When a parent consistently catches the signals, such as the slight restlessness before crying, the shift in body language before a meltdown, the specific way the child reaches out when they want to be picked up versus when they simply want to be close, that parent accumulates something researchers call felt security. This is not love in an abstract sense, but a neurologically encoded feeling that this person is watching me, this person is safety. The child reaching toward that parent across the room is not making a sentimental choice. They are following the output of an evaluation process that they have been continuously running since the first weeks of life. But there is another layer of meaning to this issue that almost no parent is prepared for, because this preference is not fixed, and the way it changes reveals something remarkable about how early cognition in children truly works. Developmental psychologists at the Institute of Child Development at the University of Minnesota tracked preference patterns throughout infancy and found an incredibly consistent model. Between around 6 and 9 months of age, most infants consolidate attachment around one primary attachment figure. This is the peak of what is called stranger anxiety, and it corresponds to a large-scale reorganization in the way the infant brain classifies the surrounding social world. Familiar versus unfamiliar, safe versus unknown. This preference is not simply about that specific parent. It is the child's brain drawing a circle around what it has classified as known and retreating toward the center of that circle when the outside world feels uncertain. Here is what that means in practical terms. The parent being pushed away during this period is not being rejected because of who they are. They are being used as a measuring tool. Watch what happens when that parent enters the room during a calm moment, when there is no stress, no stranger, no disruption. The preference decreases significantly. It becomes rigid and obvious again when the child is tired, sick, or overstimulated. The attachment hierarchy does not reflect love, it reflects threat assessment. And the number one attachment figure is whoever the child's nervous system has encoded as the most reliable signal that the threat level is low. Now I need to tell you about a finding that completely reshaped the way researchers think about the non-preferred parent. Because for decades, people had always assumed that secondary attachment was simply a weaker attachment, less important, and more easily replaced. Data from the past 10 years has systematically destroyed that assumption. A landmark longitudinal study published in the journal Child Development followed children from infancy until the age of 7 and found that the quality of attachment with the secondary caregiver, the one who does not receive those dramatic outstretched arms at the end of the workday, actually predicted specific cognitive and social outcomes that primary attachment did not. Especially the child's willingness to explore unfamiliar situations, their resilience when the primary caregiver is absent, and their ability to form relationships with people outside the immediate family. Researchers began calling this phenomenon secure base expansion. The primary attachment figure is the base. The secondary attachment figure is the one who teaches the child that leaving the base is completely safe. What truly concerns developmental pediatricians is something entirely different. A child who cannot be comforted by either parent, a child who shows the same flat response to both caregivers and to strangers, a child who does not seem to track either parent's face with any particular attention or preference. Researchers at the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development note that these patterns may indicate a disruption in the attachment system that has nothing to do with parenting quality and everything to do with how the child's nervous system is processing social information. Early identification, before 12 months of age, completely changes what intervention can achieve in ways that waiting until toddlerhood simply cannot replicate. Trust your own instincts on this issue. You are observing this child more closely than anyone else on earth. And parents who sense that something is not right are almost always right that there is something genuinely worth exploring further. So the next time a child reaches past you to demand the other person in the room, remember what you are truly witnessing. A brain that has been continuously running an evaluation process since before it could even hold up its own head. A nervous system that has recorded thousands of micro-interactions and used them to build a map of who sees me most clearly. A tiny human being doing one of the most sophisticated things any organism can do. That is ranking the world based on the safety it provides and leaning toward the person who has made them feel safest most often. That is not rejection at all. That is precision. And that is the most honest thing any of us ever communicates to another person. If you have ever been the non-preferred parent, and this article has reshaped what that means, leave a comment below, because that experience is far more common than people usually say. And the science behind it is more interesting than anyone ever expected. If you want to understand why babies cry the moment one parent leaves the room but seem completely fine just 2 minutes later, that will be the topic of the next video. The neuroscience behind it is nothing like what most parents have always mistakenly believed.